Until recently, the EU thought burning household waste in giant plants was a smart and green way to cut landfill and generate power. But Brussels has changed its mind and is cutting off funding, saying the future is recycling, not burning. Now, countries are left with big debts on costly incinerators, and communities are left asking, was this ever really green? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, across Europe, waste-to-energy plants were built with the help of EU funds and sold as a cleaner, modern alternative to landfill. But evidence suggests these plants are actually responsible for dangerous emissions. A shift in EU policy and green investment being redirected risks leaving these facilities as stranded assets. So, do they still have a role to play?
Copenhagen's iconic Amabek waste-to-energy plant. On its rooftop, a ski slope, park and climbing walls. Inside, the facility produces electricity and heat for almost 700,000 people living in Denmark's capital. There are hundreds of such facilities across Europe.
We are the most efficient waste-fired power plant in the world. We use it both for electricity and district heating. We have a lot of flexibility in the plant.
Burning rubbish to create energy was believed to be a win-win, cutting landfill waste while also generating power. But it remains controversial. The release of carbon dioxide and other toxins has raised health and pollution concerns. And now the EU is reducing its funding for these plants. So where will Europe's rubbish go? In 2022, the European Union produced more than 2.2 billion tons of waste. Around 40% was recycled, while nearly a third went to landfill. Brussels is pushing new policies to boost recycling. But as consumer society continues to thrive, how can Europe best tackle its waste problem?
Well, let's bring in our guests on this one. Joining us from France in Aix-les-Thermes, we have Chris Caldwell, CEO of United Renewables. They develop clean energy. Now in the UK, in Exeter, James Dyke is Associate Professor in Earth Systems Science. That's at the University of Exeter. And in Spain, in Sant Andreu Salou, is Janek Vahk. He's Zero Pollution Policy Manager at Zero Waste Europe. Guys, you're all very welcome to this roundtable. Chris, to you first. Burning rubbish to create energy was once seen as renewable, but the reality here is this is really burning perfectly recyclable material in many cases.
That's true up to a point, Enda. I would push back slightly on the idea that it was ever seen as renewable. We had a serious problem at the time, particularly the real boom in waste to energy, really, in incineration was the 70s to the 90s, and there the problem was very much focused in on we have too much waste. What are we going to do with it, rather than seeing it fundamentally as an energy issue? So we have the landfills at the time were producing methane, but there was no mature recycling system. But information has moved on. We now understand the resource that we're burning is valuable in a lot of ways. There's some parts of it that are extremely valuable. And burning almost anything is wasteful. So, for example, a plastic bottle. It takes about 16 times the amount of energy to make the bottle than it does that you get from burning it. So it is very very inefficient in a lot of ways. We're also far more conscious of carbon now than we were at the time. So like each ton burned releases between kind of 0.7 and 1.7 tons of CO2. Much of it is from the plastics I was just talking about. And really importantly, once an incinerator is built, it must run constantly. And that locks us into feeding the furnace instead of reducing waste, which really needs to be kind of the focus for the next cycle that we're looking in on.
Thanks, Chris. James, to you, is burning all this material and waste, is it the lesser of two evils?
What I don't want to do is frame the solution that's being proposed by burning waste as some kind of fix of a problem that it's never going to fix. I mean, the problem that we've got is essentially we've got too much waste. We produce too much rubbish. And as Chris said, the original motivation for waste incineration was not to generate renewable electricity. It was basically we're running out of landfill space. We're running out of capacities to deal with the effluent of our highly consumerist societies. And when you began this segment, you talked about that waste incineration was burning things that could be recycled. Well, in some respects, it's not. And that's another kind of potentially false solution, because a lot of what's being burnt nowadays are plastics, and plastics are extremely difficult, if not impossible, to recycle. So the only thing you can really do with plastics is put them in a hole. And as we know, we have a global plastics production and waste problem. I mean, to give you some kind of context, what was it? In 1950, global plastics production was about 2 million tons. And now it's about 500 million tons. And if we continue that rate of increase by the middle of the century, we're going to be probably producing, 1 billion tons of plastic each year. And this has just been accumulating in the environment. And we know there are these great concerns around plastics, pollutions. Plastics are everywhere, the bottom of the sea, microplastics are in our bodies. And it has been proposed that burning that plastic is a solution to releasing that plastic waste into the environment. But really, the solution is we've just got to significantly reduce the production of plastics and also just reduce the total amount of waste that we're producing.
Janek, to you, how much individual responsibility as citizens then do we all bear? Our choices every day, what we choose to drink, not having a cup for life for our coffee. I walk around London every day and I see a small army of people with a freshly poured coffee when they could be making a lifestyle choice to help the planet and use a cup for life. These are just small measures that would make a difference.
Well, absolutely. We all have a role to play in it. I think the first thing that you mentioned is avoiding a single-use, repairing instead of replacing. You can also actually, separate your waste much better at home. A lot of waste that actually ends up incinerated because it's not really separated properly, and often you actually really don't have the opportunity to separate. So I wouldn't blame just individuals for the lack of effort. But because it's also the society is really designed for waste, and that's what must change in the first place. If every community had strong reuse systems in place, high quality separate collection, and also further sorting, for example, of the waste which is currently incinerated, I think that doing the right thing would be much easier.
Chris, to you, I see the European Union is reducing its funding for these facilities, for these incinerators across the EU. That kind of tells us everything, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. Okay. So the European Union has been operating for a while on an assumptions-based policy. So right now, so as of the 2020, it's been moved to so that the assumption is against the funding and permitting of new waste-to-energy plants. But there will always be exceptions to that rule. There's just been a new waste-to-energy plant commissioned in Gdansk, for instance. But there needs to be some very, very good reasons for it. The headline is European Union believes that these plants are inefficient, they are contrary to circularity, and they are it's carbon offensive, for lack of a better word. But they will, in extreme circumstances, and you require some like geopolitical reasons as well as economic and social reasons, approve occasional plants like they didn't get ants. But as a general rule, the principle is no, the European Union does not believe these are a good thing anymore.
Thanks, Chris. James, talk to me about Denmark. I see Denmark doesn't even produce enough of its own waste to merit keeping these incinerators going, the one in Copenhagen in particular. So Denmark is actually importing waste from countries like the United Kingdom. Is that correct?
Yeah, and there is a global trade in waste. I mean, most infamous, there's probably the global network in waste textiles, in which many of the clothes that you might donate to a charity shop end up in a country in sub-Saharan Africa where it's meant to be recycled and it basically ends up in a hole in the ground, or maybe even in some kind of water system. So there is this understanding and appreciation that some waste is useful, it's economically useful, it can be recycled, it can be repurposed, it might be able to generate energy. But look, the reason they've got this problem is because of overcapacity, and build it and they will come is a potentially perverse incentive to even produce waste. And there are some examples in which the incentives to reduce farm waste by taking that farm waste and then using it in biodigesters has actually in some instances increased the amount of waste being produced on farms, because there's an economic incentive for individual farmers to do that. So obviously it's a systemic issue. And what municipal waste incineration is kind of typically trying to do is a bit of a sticking plaster to try to address the deeper malaise in our societies, which is essentially overconsumption.
Janek, I remember a couple of years ago talking to a journalist colleague who had observed me washing yogurt pots. And he said to me, having just made a documentary, he said to me, you do realize all of this stuff is buried or burnt. Why are you washing it? Talk to me about that. I mean, the education of people, are we wasting our time washing plastics and religiously doing recycling when an awful lot of it is going to go up in smoke?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say so. It really starts at home. If we wanted to have better reuse and recycling, I stress reuse because I clearly see the limitations of recycling. But if you want to have a high quality of materials being separate collected, door to door, ideally, or via TRS systems. These are the kind of fee-based systems where you return your bottle. These are the best performing, and they have the highest recovery rates. Really achieving around above 80, even 90% recovery rates. So these are the kind of individual behavior, as you said, is really important. So when it comes to now concretely washing your yogurt pots, I mean, yes, ideally it would be nice if you did it at home, but it can be also done afterwards. There has been actually a pretty good development in recent years in technologies that do hot washing. But again, of course, it adds the cost. So let's start at home.
Thank you, Janek. Chris, to you, I just want to come back to a phrase James used there, a global trade in waste. I think a lot of people would be surprised to learn that waste has value, waste is traded, and that waste travels.
Yes, of course. If you break down what the components of waste are, at one point we all thought whatever we have bought into the house is in some way valuable. So there's a lot of things that are then being thrown out, like even food waste. There is a value if you put it into an anaerobic digestion plant. You can then capture the processes where the food breaks down and capture the gases and turn that into a gas that can be used to displace fossil fuels. The plastics are fundamentally, we use a lot of plastics because it's a fundamentally valuable product. We should be reusing them. But fundamentally, we need to get down to the point, as I think everybody's been saying here, that we need kind of mandatory product design standards and a stronger producer responsibility, large scale investment in advanced recycling and reuse systems, because we're consuming too much stuff. Too much stuff is being provided to us in forms which is just single use, throw it away. We need to be stopping all of that. It is possible though. It's like cities like Milan have shown that I'm just talking about the organics and the foods. You can recover up to 70% of organics through separate collections and through getting society around and focused in on this one area, which is food waste, having regular collections, making it easy for people. I have a fundamental, just going back to what Janek was saying earlier on about individual responsibility. I've got a real issue with it being pushed down to us as individual humans going about our lives and saying this is our problems, this is our issues. We're just going about our lives, doing things that society kind of essentially demands of us, and it is causing environmental issues. The system around us needs to change. We need to be, it needs to be much easier for us to be making the right choices. An example like Milan is a very good example of how we can be doing that in relation to foods. but also in relation to single-use plastics, there is the recycling. There's an awful lot of things that the system around us can do. Could talk about this for a long time, but I'll pass it on.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that. James, to you, I see the European Union has set a target of sending less than 10% of its waste to landfill by the year 2035. So the clock is ticking on this. What would you like to see them do to fulfill that plan or that ambition?
Well, Chris has already introduced the mandates word, right? And if you want something that ambitious, you need mandates. I mean, the European Union has also got some quite ambitious climate targets. The UK's got arguably the most ambitious climate target in the world, and you need mandates to do that because market forces are just never going to respond at the rate and pace and scale that we need them to. So in terms of increasing circularity, the way you increase circularity is you make things that can be recirculated. And, you know, the problem with our single-use plastics are, by their very name, we use them once and we throw them away. About 2/3 of all plastic produced has a life of less than 1 month. Now that can be affected by, in some instances, behavior change. Yes, we can all do things differently, but it is impossible at the moment to consume significantly less single-use plastics. I mean, when I go to the shops, everything is wrapped in plastic. The fruit, the vegetables, pretty much everything comes enclosed. And there will always be important reasons, usually like medical or clinical reasons, for single-use plastic. The vast majority, we could be much cleverer about. We could be much more sensible about how we use these kind of materials. To do that, you need mandates at the retailers, but then also we need to work it back to the producers, which are the fossil fuel companies. Fossil fuel companies are the big proponents, the drivers of plastics production, because it's a useful route to use their fossil fuels. So putting the dots together, we can begin to see how we can make a recyclable, a circular kind of economy that the EU could reach in a very ambitious period of time, but it's going to have to be quite politically muscular to do that.
Thanks, James. Janek, on that point, where is this political muscle going to come from in Europe?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at like what is happening right now, the European Commission is having a consultation on the Circular Economy Act. So there's a great opportunity actually to change some of the things. And one of the things is really the issue of also the incineration and landfilling. This is both on the agenda. Unfortunately, maybe too much about landfilling and too little about incineration, because what we have been seeing is that actually the waste is just moving from landfills to incinerators. So we really need to start addressing the generation of residual waste in the first place and just stop kind of this dogmatic discussion about that the incineration is somehow better than landfilling. Yeah? So yeah, I think there is the opportunities is right there now, and so we have a big expectations that the Commission will come up with a very good proposal in 2026, and we need everybody, of course, to give their suggestions and to make sure that we are moving in the right direction.
Thanks, Janek. Chris, to you, we've become a very consumer, materialistic society, must have, immediate use, single use, gone in 20 minutes after buying those coffees or hot drinks or whatever. Where do we go? I mean, where do you think we need to start making the changes to stop sending so much stuff to landfill?
This is all you say we are, which is true, but it hasn't always been this. You know, if you just go back a couple of generations, my kind of grandparents' generation was waste of nothing. I can remember like telling stories about them, like just taking a chicken around the table with 7 kids and just making sure that every kind of ounce of meat from that bone was taken. We're not kind of wasteful by nature. We're wasteful by society. We're wasteful by the messaging that's around us, and that can change. If we need to be kind of making kind of positive messaging towards kind of the powers that be, our political leaders, our corporate leaders, to say that we care about future generations. We want to make differences. We want to make sure that the planet is better when we leave it than when we found it. At the moment, we are not in that place. We are the planet is getting we're using multiple planets worth of stuff each day. And that's, you just can't continue like that. Eventually, we're going to run out of stuff. So we need to be getting to changing our societal attitudes, telling our leaders that we want to be changing our attitudes back to a couple of generations back, where we were not the wasteful creatures that we've become.
James, that's a very good point, isn't it? We've become a very wasteful species, wasteful society.
Yeah, I mean, capitalism, it's a hell of a drug, right? I mean, neoliberalism, hyper-consumerism, this idea that we'll have a new phone every 6 months, that we can afford to eat meat anytime that we want, that we can buy clothes once and throw them away, that we can drink bottled water that's transported around the world. And just, we've assumed, or our society has assumed, that the Earth system will just deal with all that pollution, and the accumulation of carbon dioxide pollution in the atmosphere has produced the crisis of climate change, which is probably going to get much, much worse. And then we've got the crisis of plastics production. And then in trying to fix that particular problem, we've got municipal waste incineration. And then in some instances, when those incinerators don't work particularly well, you've got increases of incidence of cancer or even pollution of water bodies. So this is all getting back to the point that, you know, in many respects, we're going too fast. The throughput of materials through our civilization is just simply far too great. So we need to slow down. And that is, we talked about political muscle earlier, a really, really difficult thing for policymakers to address, because it means you would need to think about the primacy of economic growth, because every politician pretty much around the world assumes that all of humanity's problems are going to be solved by economic growth, even the problems caused by economic growth. So to confront them with a really quite radically different approach to dealing with the problems of, let's say, incineration or pollution, needs them to really engage with what are the point of our societies, what's the goods and services that our economies produce for, you know, how are they helping people, are they allowing people to be well fed and well clothed, or are they just the latest iteration of a kind of system which is sort of gone mad and is in the process of eating through our finite earth and producing all sorts of harms.
Chris, I noticed Denmark has now closed 7 incinerators, Denmark not producing very much waste itself. Do you think this is something we're likely to see in other countries, then, the move away from incineration?
It's hard to see. Well, one thing that does help is that the European Union has largely shut down the new plants being built. And older plants that go out of commission will then be naturally reducing the demand. Our waste annually is relatively stable, slightly decreasing in the European Union, but relatively stable. I think the most important messaging, though, is that we shouldn't be commissioning, unless there's exceptionally good reasons for it, we shouldn't be commissioning new waste-to-energy plants or new incinerators, because all it's doing is it's locking in the dependency upon, you know, hundreds of thousands of tons of waste each and every year, that is a demand that is counter the interests of the European Union, is counter the interests of the local population to be having this need. And you tend to finance these plants on kind of 30-year bonds. So the lifespan of any new plant is at least 30 years. And that's a very long time to be committing to a waste stream that we do hope will be reducing over time as we produce less waste and as we recycle more and we get more circularity into our economy.
Thanks, Chris. James, final point to you. I just want to go back to that phrase you used, the global trade in waste. I can't stop thinking about it. Morally, should wealthy nations like the UK be sending their waste abroad? Why can't the UK deal with its own waste?
Because it's cheaper to put it in a container ship and transport it a few thousand miles across the world to make it somebody else's problem. And I mean, there are potentially economic goods that can come from that. You can repurpose those textiles, you can recycle. But let's be honest, it's because it's cheaper. I mean, there have been a number of essentially scandals that UK municipal recycling schemes haven't really recycled anything. They've just put it in a great big box and put it on a ship, and that's somebody else's problem. So when you've got these kind of perverse incentives, you've always got to, as I said earlier, join the dots. So one way to decrease waste is to make it more expensive. You know, polluter pays. It's not an externality. If you produce waste, you need to deal with the consequence of it. Of course, then that makes it more enticing and an economically viable prospect to then just take the waste, and put it across a national border, and then somebody else can deal with it. So unless we have these kind of integrated, quite holistic, and if you're thinking about global trade in waste, you think about global pollutant, then you need global level regulation. You need global level enforcement and monitoring of that. So it's not surprising that you've had the proliferation of global waste, and also you've got the proliferation and the continuation of waste streams that really by now we should have sorted out. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous that we have the sheer volume of waste being produced in what are meant to be advanced industrialized economies. There's no excuse for it. All the technologies that we would need to rapidly increase recycling and circularity exist and have existed for decades. Usually, when you get down to it, the problem is greed.
Thank you, James. Nobody can ever say we talk rubbish here on Roundtable. And to Janek in Spain and Chris in the south of France, very grateful to you all, gents. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.